What is up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be speaking about the unsolved murder of 32-year-old Nicole, who went by Nikki Fitz, and the disappearance of her 2.5-year-old daughter, Arianna Fitz, from California, two different locations back in 2016. Now, to put things very, very lightly, this case is screwed up. It is infuriating. It is devastating. And I'll kind of get more into my thoughts on how, even what is seen as the possible solution to this case still is going to come with so much trauma and pain. I'm just shocked because it's one where things seem very crystal clear and there's just not enough evidence to back it. So I feel like while authorities are doing everything they can, it's just one of those where you're like, oh my goodness, this is so obvious. Like, there's one option of what happened. Like, there's one thing. But it's just getting enough to make sure the person or people involved can fully be convicted so they can never do this to anyone else ever again. There's a huge chance that Nikki's daughter, Arianna, is in fact still out there alive and well. That's actually kind of the consensus among her family as well as the San Francisco Police Department. She would be 7 years old at this point, so she's in the school age. Granted, things are a little bit different nowadays, but she could be out there fully alive and well and needs to be returned to her family. So please make sure you share this video or at least share her age progression picture as well as the missing poster so that hopefully something can happen in this case. Before I get into all of the details of this case, I do first need to thank Kara for collaborating with me on today's video. First of all, if you listen to my podcast, Crime After Crime with John Lorden, or if you followed my Instagram for a couple of years, you would already know that I have used Kara for a very long time, and I absolutely love it. They make things so easy and convenient for me, which is what I need for my busy schedule. And for those of you who aren't aware of what Kara is, it is an amazing company that provides personalized vitamins and supplements to you and then delivers them straight to your door. It's February, meaning we're still in the beginning of a new year, and this is the time when a lot of people typically focus a lot on their health goals, and it's a really great time to make a small but impactful change in the form of taking vitamins and supplements that will benefit your well-being. Now, I personally have always been a health freak. I work out every single day, and I always have. I pay attention to the things that go inside of my body, and that was probably the one thing that first caught my attention with Care of, is how transparent they are. You basically go online, you take a very quick quiz where you talk about your lifestyle habits and your health goals, and they provide you from that point on with a completely tailored list of vitamins and supplements that they suggest for you. Each item that is suggested also comes with a small description so you understand what you're taking. It talks about the benefits of that particular vitamin or supplement and also even provides you with where it is sourced. So you quite literally know everything about what comes in your Care of order. I personally absolutely love and heavily rely on their vitamin packets. They come in 30-day supplies like this. It's small and convenient. And each day you have this cute little personalized packet with your name on it and a really good quote with all of the vitamins that you need to take. And because I do work out so often and I actually lift pretty heavy, I really rely on things like magnesium that I take in here for muscle recovery. And I also really enjoy their fish oil for my heart health. And then also, I'm quite literally their largest fan when it comes to their protein powders. I've raved about these probably more than anything else. I personally use the plant protein in the flavor vanilla, which is also a really awesome thing about Care of is there's options for those of you out there that are vegan and vegetarian. So there's literally something for absolutely everyone. And if you are someone that likes to go to the gym, they even have this in single serving packet sizes to throw in your bag. So if you want to take the step this year to start bettering your health in a small but impactful way, make sure to go and take Care of's quiz to see the vitamins and supplements that are recommended for you. All you have to do is go ahead down below and click the link in the description and use my code Danielle50 for 50% off your first month of Care of. Thank you again to Care of for always supporting not just my channel, but also my podcast with John Lorden. And now on to the details of this infuriating case. So obviously we have to start from the very beginning and speak about Nikki. So Nikki was actually the middle child. She had an older sister named Catherine and a younger sister named Contessa who went by the name of Tess. And all three of them were raised by their single mother and were living in Culver City in Southern California. Now, Nikki was always described as being very shy when she was growing up. Tess would always joke with her that she was the one who really seemed like the baby of the family, but she had the biggest heart. The one thing that I've seen everyone say about Nikki is that she was like the definition of a selfless person. She always made sure everyone had everything that they needed. She was never hesitant to help anyone. She just was so giving. Nikki also was really good in school growing up. She got really good grades. She was always known to be the teacher's pet. She was that student where if there was something extra and special that needed to be done, she was the first one to offer to do it. And she even had plans of becoming a teacher herself when she was older. When she was in high school, Nikki began to volunteer at the Culver Recreation Center, and she actually dedicated so much time to helping this recreation center and the community that the city of LA gave her an award for it. So she was just the sweetest, most down-to-earth, giving human being possible. And then life hit really, really hard. When Nikki and both of her sisters were still in high school, unfortunately, their mother unexpectedly passed away, and this left them all with no caretaker. I'm assuming they went into the foster system. All I know for sure is that they bounced around from home to home. I think they were separated a good amount of this time. Shortly before 2012, Nikki went on to have her first daughter named Cindy. But fairly quickly, she ended up struggling as a single mother. She was having a hard time paying the bills. She was having a hard time taking care of Cindy by herself. So she made her way back to Tess, her sister, who was dating a woman named Claire at the time. And they kind of decided to lean on each other. They were all going to chip in and get a home together. They figured they could each work. They could put in a portion of rent. Obviously, Cindy was welcome. It would take a lot of the burden off a lot of them. So they settled in together in a home in Pacifica, California. And this was exciting. It felt like a fresh new start. It felt like a positive future was coming. They had such a blast searching on Craigslist for all of the furniture that they were going to fit into the home. But unfortunately, it became a lot more challenging than they thought it was going to be. Even with all three of them working towards paying for the rent, they still were falling behind. It was still a very expensive area to live in. And it became even more difficult when Nikki became pregnant with her second daughter, Arianna. I'm assuming she probably couldn't work quite as much. She had other medical bills to take care of, so she fell pretty far behind on rent. They realized that this plan that they had wasn't working the way they all had hoped, so they had to make a very difficult decision to end their lease early and part ways to look for better work and more affordable housing, but unfortunately, this did not mean very good things for Nikki. While Tess and Claire decided to kind of go their own separate way, they were going to go look for a cheaper town in California to live in. Nikki knew that her best option was still San Francisco, that there were more jobs there was a lot more opportunity, healthcare was going to be closer and better, so she had to stay in San Francisco, but she obviously couldn't afford it. So what ended up happening is Nikki decided to send her daughter Cindy to live with her father in Southern California. She was hoping this would be a better living situation for Cindy, that, just a better way of life, and she could hopefully then go on to have Arianna and get a job, and then eventually circle back around, bring everyone back together, and all live in San Francisco together. So that meant in the time being, after sending Cindy away, that she ended up living in a homeless woman's shelter. She lived there up until after Arianna was born. And Arianna was born on September 6, 2013. And it became pretty clear to her that she was going to have to really basically perform a lot of miracles in order to get out of the situation, because she needed money to put Arianna in daycare to work a job, but she couldn't get a job without having a daycare, which required money she would get from the job. So it was just this really vicious cycle of being stuck in this homeless woman's shelter and not being able to have anyone watch her daughter so she could work, so she could better both of their lives. She still did the absolute best that she could. She still visited her sisters and her friends and all of them absolutely loved Arianna. Arianna was described as having just the best personality, just like her mom. She was just always so loving and always so happy. She had the most recognizable, huge smile always on her face. She was just always such a happy child, despite the fact that her mother and her were always seemingly struggling. But then Nicki ended up meeting someone that she believed was going to solve a lot of her problems. Limasani Briggs. So Limasani Briggs is a self-proclaimed evangelical street pastor. She doesn't have a home church or anything like that. She just said that she was a street pastor and I guess would go around to these different homeless shelters and women's shelters and kind of speak to all the individuals there. That's not something that's really all too uncommon, but most of the time it ends up being a little bit questionable. But she seemed pretty harmless to Nicki, and after a while they ended up having a pretty good relationship, and Limasani offered her something that she just couldn't refuse. It was basically a way out. Limasani said that she understood Nicki and wanted to help her and her daughter, so she offered them a place to stay while Nicki got up on her feet. She said that she would watch Arianna so that Nicki could go and get a job and start saving money and eventually move into her own home, hopefully bring Cindy back to her. Again, this life that Nicki was constantly striving towards. But this situation that was supposed to help Nicki started popping out red flags left and right. I mean, right away. So first of all, Nicki successfully found a job. She started working at a Best Buy and she was getting lots of hours, was making decent wage, and it was good, except for the fact that as soon as this happened, Limasani started charging her for rent and childcare. This seemed to go entirely against this original offer of giving her, all of this help so that she could get back up on her feet. Now, I know that some people could probably say, yeah, but, she is staying there. Maybe she just was, making her pay a little bit. Unfortunately, that's not at all the case. It seemed like the rent and the childcare prices were constantly fluctuating, and they were basically constantly fluctuating to almost perfectly meet every single one of her paychecks. So essentially, Nicki was working her butt off and then having to hand over all of the money to Limasani. And that is like literally so far from the only problem that was happening. So on top of that, Nicki started to go to her sister Tess with lots of complaints. While Nicki was working, at Best Buy, trying to better her life, Limasani felt it necessary to constantly text her, belittling her. She would text her and call her all sorts of terrible names and tell her that she was a bad influence to her daughter. She would tell her that she really desperately needed to find God because that was the only thing that was going to save her in her life. And she also got on her a lot about the people that she was around and some guy that Nicki was seeing. Nicki said that the only way that Limasani would have even known she was seeing anyone is if Limasani had been going through her personal diary. So it felt like every aspect of Nicki's life was being watched and, under control of Limasani, and even more so because Limasani also would not give her a key to the house. Despite her paying every penny possible towards rent and living there, she wasn't allowed keys. And if that meant she got home when Limasani wasn't home, she would have to sit there and wait for sometimes hours for Limasani to come back. It was a very scary situation, and Nicki really drew the line when Limasani started to become bizarrely possessive of Arianna. At this point, Tess and Claire realized they needed to get Nicki out of the situation. It was to the point where this was a lot of manipulation. So Tess and Claire, who lived in Santa Cruz at the time, drove all the way to San Francisco one night to, I think it was in November of 2015, to go ahead and pick her up because this was just such a bad situation. It was to the point where, Nicki wasn't even letting Limasani watch Arianna anymore. She started letting Limasani's nieces, Siolo and Helena, which I will get into them in just a minute. She was letting both of them watch Arianna. And when Tess and Claire went to pick Nicki up from Limasani's home, they ended up calling San Francisco Police Department to escort them because it was such a bad situation that they were worried that either she was going to try to take the child or was going to hurt the child or possibly hurt Nikki in the process, or basically refuse to let either of them go. They did successfully take Nikki and Arianna out of Limasani Briggs' home, and they brought her back to Santa Cruz, but this was only a temporary situation, again, because Santa Cruz was about 2 hours of a drive away, and Nikki couldn't give up her job at Best Buy. She needed this job. And so she kept pushing on as hard as possible. She at first was taking the 2-hour trip to work every day. She didn't have a personal vehicle, so either her sister or Claire had to take her, or she used public transportation. But unfortunately, Arianna was still needing a babysitter, and Nikki had no choice but to leave Arianna, Limasani's nieces, Ciolo and Helena. So, to kind of get into them, Ciolo Hearn and Helena Hearn were Limasani's nieces, and Helena Hearn was actually Helena Hearn Martin, and she was married to a man named Devin Martin. Now, Helena and Devin lived in Oakland, which is about 15-20 minutes away from San Francisco, and Ciolo Hearn lived in Emeryville. And basically, it just seemed like whoever could take care of Arianna at the time would take her. So basically, Arianna was having to take all of these really long trips with her mom and be dropped off at the babysitter's house for her mom to go and work. Both Tess and Claire did express their concerns about the fact that Arianna was still being watched by someone that was related to Limasani Briggs, the same woman who ended up texting Nikki after she left saying, "Bring my baby back," like demanding Arianna come back, referring to her as her child. And they were concerned that there was this connection there. Is this some way for Limasani to try to get Arianna, who she is claiming is her child, back? But Nikki made it very clear that she trusted both Ciolo and Helena, also Devin, and that they apparently were not on speaking terms with Limasani at the time, so she believed there was no way that Arianna would end up around her, and this wasn't a threat at all. Plus, it was pretty much her only option. They were the only ones that were willing to work with the price point. They were the only ones that Arianna was comfortable with at the time. It was quite literally the only way to keep her in a job and out of a homeless shelter. But things were still very difficult because Nikki didn't have a consistent home to go to every day, and she was working overtime, endless hours, picking up shifts left and right at the local Best Buy in order to save up as much money as possible. And unfortunately, she would sometimes work really, really late at night, which meant having to take the 2-hour trip home wasn't always plausible. So sometimes she would end up just spending the night on someone's couch. And oftentimes that meant leaving Arianna at the babysitter's house for like a week plus at a time because she had to work so many shifts back to back. And it was just not a good idea to take a 2-year-old at the time and late at night go 2 hours back to Santa Cruz. And things just kept getting more complicated. While all of this is going on, unfortunately, Cindy ended up being taken by Child Protective Services from her father in Southern California. And this meant that the few days that Nikki did have off, she was now having to go all the way to LA to attend court cases in hopes of figuring out what was going on and gaining back full custody of her daughter. So I don't know how she slept. I quite literally don't understand how she managed to have all of this going on all at one time, but that also just meant more time Arianna was at the babysitter's house. But at this point, it seemed like a trusting relationship. They didn't mind keeping Arianna, and this was kind of seen as like just a chapter of their life, just a brief moment that would eventually pass by. She was just working hard to save up for a home, and she was also working to get her other daughter back, and Ciolo and Helena seemed very giving and understanding. But there were definitely a few strange things that were happening during all of this. So when Nikki ended up staying a lot with her sister and Claire in Santa Cruz, both Ciolo and Helena expressed to her that they didn't think it was good for Arianna to go there, that Arianna would be too far away from them. So they would frequently kind of like deny Nikki seeing her daughter. They would say, "Oh, we're not home right now." Just all these different excuses as to why Nikki shouldn't come and get Arianna, basically. But at this point, I'm sure she had so much going on that she just assumed they were trying to look out for her best interests. Eventually, things did settle down a little bit. Nikki ended up being offered another really great opportunity, and this time it was actually a really good one. Her coworkers ended up finding out that she was essentially homeless. They noticed that she was spending a lot of time in the break room. She would be there all night, even when she was off. And eventually, one of them offered to take her home. And after offering that numerous times, she finally agreed and broke down once they got in the car, saying that she had absolutely nowhere to go. So one of her coworkers, Goyette Williams, offered for Nikki and Arianna to stay with her in her home in Mission Village, which is a district in San Francisco. So this was an awesome opportunity. First of all, it was a coworker, so someone that understood Best Buy, understood the schedule. It was also someone that could help her with transportation to work, possibly. Plus, it was actually in San Francisco, so it wouldn't take her any time at all to get to work, and she wouldn't have to do all of this commuting. And on top of that, she also would now have extra money so that she could find different babysitters for Arianna. It also opened up the possibility that she could get Cindy back with a stable home and a stable job nearby. Except that is not at all how any of this ended up going. Nikki began to notice when she told the babysitters that she would no longer be needing their help as much and that she was moving closer by and would have other options. They even more frequently created excuses as to why she could not come and get Arianna. And then one day in particular, Nikki reached out to them and was like, look, I'm coming to get her. That's it. Like, this is the final time. She's not going to be coming back to you. I'm coming to pick her up. They were like, oh, by the way, without your permission, we actually took your daughter out of town to Disneyland on a trip. So you can't come and get her. And at this point, I mean, this is not their child. They have no legal custody over this young girl, and they are taking her out of town without her parents' permission. And I understand it seemed like there were kind of loose boundaries with the situation because they were having to help so much with Arianna. However, if you are not a parent, there is always a line you do not cross, and they seem to be crossing it. And it became very clear that they had no intentions of giving Arianna back, because once Nikki started putting up a fight, they would say, you're an unfit mother, you're a really bad influence on her, kind of the same things that Limasani Briggs was saying to her a few months prior. Goyette did try to convince Nikki to go to police because it seemed that these people had essentially kidnapped her child. It had been 6 weeks plus since Nikki had last seen her daughter. It's believed the last time she saw her was sometime in February, and we're now reaching March, going into April of 2016, and these people were still creating all these excuses why she couldn't see them. But unfortunately, Nikki never did. And I know there's a lot of speculation around this, but you have to sit down and think about what she was going through at the time. Nikki was already struggling with the courts in regards to her other daughter, Cindy. And I'm sure she was terrified to go to the police for another one of her daughters while she's having this ongoing custody battle. Given her situation of, just settling into a new home after pretty much being homeless, after living with this street pastor, I feel like she was probably worried they would deem her as an unfit mother and take both Cindy and Arianna away from her permanently. Well, if these police officers went to the babysitters and, went to Limasani, they would hear this story of, oh, she's an unfit mother and, she doesn't deserve to have these kids. We take way better care of her, without understanding what was actually going on behind all of this. Just one giant manipulative, toxic, scary situation where they were actually taking her child from her. So Nikki basically decided to deal with this all on her own. And this leads us up to April 1st, 2016. So this apparently was the date that Nikki informed the babysitters, this is the day you are done watching my daughter. I am coming this day to pick her up, and then you will not see her anymore. And as I'm sure you can guess, this probably did not go over very well. Now, I'm also assuming she probably knew it wasn't going to be as easy as that. I've also seen it was potentially the 2nd of April that she planned to go there, but just know over this time period of what I'm about to speak about, she planned to get her child back. So that day, she spent most of the day at work, and she was supposed to meet with her sister Tess later on, but there was a change of plans, so she decided to hang out with one of her coworkers and friends, Michael. They went shopping for a little bit, they grabbed some pizza, and he remembers that right before taking her back home, she asked to stop at a local ATM, and she withdrew a lot of money. And he wasn't quite sure how much. She didn't say what the money was for. He just witnessed it and thought it was a lot of money, and that was kind of strange. He then dropped her off with her roommate, where they hung out for a little bit and watched a movie until 9 p.m. that night. So at 9 p.m., her roommate states that Nikki received a phone call that seemed urgent, and she said that it was the babysitters, and she had to go to meet them at a local restaurant. I think it was called BJ's nearby, and she would be back in 5 minutes. Now, as someone who just is constantly on Google Maps, I did try to figure this whole thing out. There's not a BJ's within 5 minutes of her in the slightest using public transportation. I think the closest one is like an hour away. There is a JB's, which is kind of a different place, and that is about 7 minutes away from where she was living. So either way, she probably wasn't going to be back in 5 minutes, but it wasn't expected for her to never come back at all. And the next morning, everyone close to Nikki immediately knew something was wrong. There were quite a few handfuls of strange things that happened over the next couple of hours after Nikki left the home in Mission District. Goyette Williams woke up early the next morning of the 2nd and saw that she had received a text message from Nikki at about 12:45 a.m., so a few hours after she had left the house. And it said that she was heading to Fresno with a guy named Sam. Now, most of her friends knew her very well. Keep in mind, she didn't really have many places to go. So the people that she did know spent a good amount of time with her, and she was very open and honest with. And nobody had any idea that she was friends with anyone named Sam. And then, about 30 minutes after this, at 1:13 a.m., Nikki made a post on Facebook. And the post said, and I quote, "Spending time with my 3-year-old. Need this break." There are so many issues with all of this. First of all, she claimed she was going to Fresno at 12:45 in the morning with someone named Sam, and her family didn't know a Sam, her friends didn't know a Sam. Fresno is also 3 hours away from where she was staying. And this post says that she was spending time with Arianna, who was only 15 minutes away in Oakland. So somehow within 30 minutes of a text saying she was going to Fresno, she was actually with Arianna, who was only 15 minutes away, and not with someone named Sam. And that also brings us to the fact that Arianna wasn't 3. Arianna was 2 at the time. And to top it off, the entire post was just grammatically incorrect. Things were spelled wrong. Break was spelled B-R-A-K-E instead of B-R-E-A-K. And if you guys remember from the beginning of this video, Nikki absolutely loved school, and then how on earth was she spending time with her 2-year-old daughter at 1 in the morning when she also was apparently heading with some guy named Sam to Fresno? Goyette knew something was wrong from the text message alone and contacted Michael, the guy that she had been with the night before, and he said he hadn't heard from Nikki that day or the night before after she left to go meet with the babysitters. They also got in contact with Tess and Claire, and Tess said that she also found it was very strange, this post that was made, and she had a very strong feeling that it was not Nikki who made that post. Tess and Claire immediately drove to San Francisco to help search for Nikki, and Catherine, her oldest sister, also flew in because it was obvious this was out of character for Nikki. She didn't end up showing up to work that day. She never called in, like no call, no show. This was not normal. They immediately tried to report Nikki as missing, but unfortunately, we all know what happens when you try to report an adult as missing. Technically, they are allowed to go as they would like, and they don't have to legally tell anybody that. So a lot of the times, unless there is something serious going on, authorities don't really have a lot that they can do about the situation. So it was really up to Tess and Claire and all of Nikki's friends to figure out what was going on. So at this point, Tess got on to her laptop, got on her phone, and was trying to communicate with every single person she knew of that knows Nikki. And she went through all of her Facebook friends, was messaging people, texting people. Not a single person had heard from Nikki. And then I think there was like a Facebook page very quickly created, or they at least posted to her Facebook page or something, in regards to that about her being missing. And they had all of these people that were on there and really worried about her. At this point, they also had told authorities, she's missing, but also she has a daughter that's with babysitters. And they had no idea the contact information for the babysitter. So Arianna ended up being reported as missing as well. And I thought it was so strange because the babysitters were friends with Nikki on Facebook, but they certainly didn't chime in on anything. They didn't step up and be like, oh yeah, we have Arianna, she's safe, she's fine. They didn't say a word. And Tess ended up friend requesting, I think it was Ciolo, and asked her, do you know where Nikki is? Do you have Arianna? What's going on? And immediately silence. When they put everything together, Tess, Claire, Goyette, Michael, everyone was like, you know what? All of this, now that we're finding out bits and pieces of the puzzle, points directly to the babysitters. But when they went to authorities with this, none of them really knew the babysitters at all. They didn't know last names. They didn't know any phone numbers, information like that. So luckily, Tess had actually driven Arianna and Nikki to both Helena and Ciolo's house. They basically took the memories that they had and went searching in these different areas until they finally did manage to find both of the houses. And they went to authorities, gave them the addresses, they were able to find their full names, and authorities immediately went to Ciolo and Helena for answers. Right off the bat, as I'm sure you can imagine, things were inconsistent and off. Obviously, authorities first wanted to lay eyes on Arianna because she was in fact reported missing at this point along with her mother. They wanted to make sure she was okay and put her in the hands of relatives until they were able to find Nikki. But Ciolo and Helena and Devin claimed they didn't have her. They said they hadn't had Arianna in weeks at this point, but also apparently couldn't offer up who they dropped her off with, when they last had her, nothing. And all of this contradicts information that Nikki had told everyone. Nikki had stated in the past couple of weeks that she had tried to pick up Arianna and they refused. They admitted to her they had Arianna, obviously. She believed they had Arianna. So now all of a sudden that Nikki is missing, they're saying they have no clue where Arianna is. When they questioned all three individuals, authorities also noticed that every single one of their stories was inconsistent. They were constantly changing things. Nothing they said matched what the other said. And again, there were no answers when it came to Arianna. But then, unfortunately, 3 days later, on the 8th of April, a very heartbreaking discovery was found. Recreation and Parks Department employees were doing some gardening at John McLaren Park in San Francisco at the University and Woolsey entrance. And they were apparently heading towards the playground area of John McLaren Park. And they noticed that there was a piece of plywood over to the side. It was kind of covered in leaves and some different vines. You could tell it had been like just kind of hidden a little bit. And they just assumed it's trash, we should pick it up while we're cleaning up and gardening. But when they picked it up, they found Nikki's body buried in a shallow grave, underneath of it, curled up in the fetal position. And the board itself seemed to have this very strange, like, graffiti symbol on it. Her family was devastated. And I think this was kind of the last thing that everyone was expecting. And it made it 10 times scarier to know that Arianna also couldn't be found. It kind of put this idea up in the air that maybe the same thing had been done to her. I've yet to see the cause of death released. I'm assuming authorities are keeping it close to not compromise the investigation, but they did immediately bring in the Homicide and Special Victims Unit as well as the FBI for help in the case, because finding Nikki murdered and knowing her daughter was still missing really put a lot of pressure into finding Arianna. Authorities ended up releasing image of the symbol that was drawn onto the piece of plywood that was covering up Nikki. They wanted to figure out if it was somehow important, because during their forensic examination, evaluating the crime scene, they came to the conclusion that this piece of plywood was brought in by whoever disposed of Nikki in that area. Unfortunately, I've also seen that this park kind of has, a history of being a dumping spot for bodies. It was a pretty run down, not great area for a very long time. And they had actually just put a lot of money into recreating the area, making it a beautiful, safe park and place to be. So it was kind of shocking to see that this was still being used as a dumping grounds for bodies, but also I'm kind of happy they decided to put so much effort into fixing up the area, because had there not been people wandering around, I wonder how long her remains may have been sitting there without being found. But other than that, I don't know what else they had to really go on, again, because I don't know cause of death. I don't know if the money she took out of the ATM was found with her. I don't know anything at all other than she was found under this board they believe is significant. At this point, authorities had searched Helena and Ciolo's home as well as their vehicles, and they did do a forensic examination on everything as well. And they did release a very disturbing piece of information that they found in their discovery. Helena Hearn Martin had been incarcerated for killing the father of her child. So she had killed somebody before. And that means that the woman that was essentially holding Nikki's daughter captive, also the last person Nikki was supposed to see, was capable of murder, and then Nikki was found murdered. Authorities also just kept confirming things that most of Nikki's family already figured. They found that she had, in fact, taken out $600 total from the ATM, and that it was to pay the babysitters, allegedly. They also openly stated that they found evidence and were able to prove Arianna was in the care of Ciolo and Helena. But I've also seen that they were able to ping Nikki's cell phone, and it pinged at a local house in, I believe, San Francisco or Oakland. It was somewhere in that area. I didn't see it across a ton of articles, so take this one with a grain of salt. But I've seen that it pinged at a family home, and when authorities went there and tried to figure out why Nikki's phone pinged at this house, these people claimed that they didn't have any idea who she was. But again, they claimed that. Do authorities believe it? I have no idea. There's quite literally nothing online about it. To me, and also Nikki's family, it seems like she was basically told if she wanted her daughter back, she had to bring this lump sum of money. And I wonder if maybe she was told to meet at a restaurant nearby, and she got there and they were like, yeah, here, you've proven you're giving us the money. She's just at a local park at a playground, and maybe that's how they ended up at John McLaren Park. I think it is significant that she was found near the playground area. Also have seen that authorities do have footage of her near the John McLaren Park area that night. I don't know any information or details about it, but again, I just feel like all of this is kind of connected. Local authorities and FBI executed, I believe, 4 total warrants in Oakland, Emeryville, and Daly City, and I'm wondering if Daly City is maybe where Limasani was living. I couldn't get confirmation on that. I know that Oakland was where Helena was and Ciolo was in Emeryville, and they did fully announce within a month of the case, the homicide investigation starting, that Helena and Devin and Ciolo were entirely uncooperative. I know for a fact that Helen actually got a criminal lawyer, so she's covered entirely by an attorney, and they ended up switching Helena from just a witness to a possible person of interest, and at this point, her attorney told her to completely silence herself, and she's no longer allowed to speak to anybody about this case. Authorities have also come forward since and stated that they do have evidence showing that there was conflict the day of April the 1st between Nikki, Helena, Ciolo, and possibly Devin. And it did have to do with her attempting to get Arianna back. So we even know that there was, in fact, some sort of altercation and issue that day between all of them. And we know that she was heading there with money, and we know that she ended up dead. And that's why this is just so infuriating. And what I was saying is that it seems so crystal clear, but there's just a lack of evidence. It's like...
Now at 11, developing news. San Francisco police confirming tonight a new lead in a year-long search for a missing toddler who disappeared after her mother was brutally killed. Good evening, I'm Juliette Goodrich.
And I'm Brian Hackney. KPIX5's Kate Kogarin is at McLaren Park in San Francisco tonight, where the little girl's family is still holding out hope.
Nearly a year ago today, Nicole Fitz's body was found in a shallow grave here at McLaren Park. Her daughter Arianna is still missing. Her family says time has passed, but emotions are raw.
It doesn't feel like this is reality. I feel like any day now, my sister's going to call me.
But the reality for Contessa Fitz is she will never hear her sister Nicole's voice again. This day last year was the last time anyone saw Nicole alive. Their focus now, finding Nicole's now 3-year-old daughter, Arianna.
Arianna is our hope. We're doing everything we can to have this little girl home.
Tonight, there may be a break in the case. San Francisco police say FBI investigators have seized a vehicle that may be connected to Nicole's murder and Arianna's disappearance. Her family says investigators will test the car for possible DNA evidence.
As unfortunate as it is that these things are happening, it's also just great news.
Great news in light of a family tragedy. Tonight, the Fitz family's candlelight vigil marks the anniversary of Nicole's murder and Arianna's disappearance.
It is really hard. It's been a very difficult year.
Since Arianna went missing, the FBI executed search warrants in Oakland, Emeryville, and Daly City, all in an effort to find the little girl. The family say investigators initially focused on Arianna's babysitter, Helena Martin, and that Helena may be the key to bringing Arianna home alive.
I would really hate to think someone Nicole trusted with her child, that someone Nicole trusted as a friend, would do anything to harm either Nicole or Arianna.
Police still have no suspect in Nicole's murder, but her sister Contessa believes Nicole's death is connected with her niece's disappearance.
Whoever is responsible for Arianna being missing is responsible for murdering my sister.
Nicole's former employer, Best Buy, is offering a $10,000 reward that will lead to Arianna's safe return and any information that will lead to the arrest in Nicole's murder. In San Francisco, Kate Kogarin, KPIX5.
In 2017, authorities did find a car that they believe is connected to the disappearance or the murder. They haven't specifically stated which. I do know that they do have possession of the car, I'm assuming still. They did do forensics on it. However, they have not released any information, which is promising to me, because also shortly after this, when asked about it, they said they had made leaps and bounds in the case, but again, that was 2017 and we're not seeing any movement still. I think it's just hugely possible they are keeping quiet, working as diligently as possible, saving every bit of evidence they can possibly find in hopes of eventually finally making an arrest. At least that's my absolute hope. Also have stated they have 30,000 pieces of evidence in custody so far. So it's not that there's necessarily a lack of effort here. I don't believe that anyone has ever come forward indicating that the symbol on the plywood is of importance, but obviously I want to plaster it all over this video just in case it is and someone does know what it means. Personally, feels a little culty to me, but others believe that since nobody came forward, that the symbol is just kind of random graffiti, which isn't that far-fetched, but also just to play devil's advocate a little bit here, if you are in a religion, let's just put you in these shoes. If you were in some strange religion or cult that preys on single women with children in hopes of killing the mother and taking the child, you're probably not going to run to authorities or the internet with the symbol that you use for said ritual. So I feel like it's not something that should be ruled out because no one's come forward, because honestly, who would come forward? Because you're basically outing yourself there. I'm sure if any evidence was left behind on that piece of plywood, it would have been found by now. But one thing I do want to state is that if this plywood was in fact brought with the suspects in order to dispose of the body, this kind of indicates possible premeditation, which is also important. So I feel like every tiny little detail of this case has to be analyzed so perfectly in order for all of this to work out and a conviction to be made and hopefully Arianna found. it seems pretty obvious that the murder as well as the disappearance are connected, but I don't know if authorities are stating that as fact or if they're still looking into other possibilities, because maybe this is just some weird coincidence. I don't think that's the most plausible explanation to this, but I don't know if they're looking into her disappearance as something entirely separate from Nikki's murder. But to me, it all seems pretty well connected. And based off of the history that has been shared about not just Ciolo and Helena, but also Limasani, there were clear intentions of taking and keeping this child from start to finish, and controlling the mother. And Nikki seemed to be a very protective, independent woman. And maybe they realized that she was a much more difficult person to deal with than they initially believed. And so they realized it wasn't easy to control her and take the child. So instead, they would just have to get rid of her. I just find it weird that Arianna's not been found. The only reason that I even think about trafficking or anything of the sorts, or even possibly like underground adoptions as a possibility, is because I feel like if Ciolo or Helena or Limasani had Arianna, authorities would know that by now. So it seems pretty clear to me that Arianna is not being kept with those individuals. So was it ever the intention for them to keep her? Or was it always the intention to pass her off to somebody else? Arianna is 7. And she's either spent a lot of time with people mistreating her, or she is living happily, which obviously is the hope, but she is living happily with people that were involved in kidnapping her from her mother and then killing her mother. Having to tackle that sort of emotional trauma and overcoming something like that, the happiest ending is to bring her home, but that is something that just adds a whole other layer of pain and just, I don't even have the words for it. It's just devastating. The FBI is offering a $100,000 reward for anyone that has any information on Arianna's whereabouts or on the murder of her mother, Nikki. Best Buy also stepped up and they did donate $10,000. There's someone that is would have had to have taken Arianna. So there's someone that is not named and not known yet that does have her, and they have connections to people who have connections to people. There's somewhere along this ladder that there is information that someone knows and they can give to someone important to return Arianna home. So please push as much as you possibly can and share her updated photo. I know this age progression is of her when she is 6 years old. She is 7 now. So it's a bit of a change, but likely not too much. That is all that I have for you guys today. And as always, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day and choosing to take this past hour or however long it's been to listen to Nikki's story and Arianna's story and all the shares that you hopefully are going to do after this. It's just so sad to me that Nikki was struggling with so much and she was so resilient and she was so determined to better her life and her children's life, and to know that someone had this facade of wanting to help her and then potentially earned her trust and then turned around and totally destroyed and took her life as well as her daughter. Disgusting. But before I keep on rambling on, again, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below so you can become a part of the Helen fam, so hopefully we can bring them home together, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.